Do you have Tech Shield in your house? Do you
I don't know
know?
what that is.
It's a radiant barrier they put on the seat on the inside of your roof of his house with it.
Yeah, I don't think we have that, but yeah, that would definitely cause some issues for us.
I need to work on my lighting here.
Yeah, we'll see how efficiently this actually all streaming.
Our church community, we're missing the opportunity to talk and dialogue. And even though this isn't the best form of dialogue, we want to start taking any questions that you might have, and we want to start trying to answer those things. So whether that's a question about racial injustice, a question about pandemics, a question about end times or church structures, or anything you have. And I'm really excited to do this with the other three guys that are on here right now. We're gonna probably bring in other people from our staff team and kind of rope them in at different times as well when the questions seem especially appropriate. And so, what are you guys drinking? I'm drinking a little Theory coffee. Stopped by Mark's trailer this morning, so Mark's out there. So if you haven't getting out, go for it. Drinking a little Merit, Mike.
Yep.
I also
Always.
copped into Merit, yeah, over on Broadway location. Love it over there.
Like Kyle's gonna lift up.
So you off your normal.
I'm having some Iron Cutter coffee, which is my home roast. Iron Cutter being Eisenhower. So my morning kind of go-to thing when I get up early for Christine and I in the summer is I make a iced Americano or an iced latte. So I pour the espresso over ice, then add some agave and some fresh milk, and it's pretty delicious in the morning. So that's what I'm drinking right now.
Sounds delightful.
It is.
Nice.
Talk next Thursday, and so what I wanted to do today was just give you a little bit of background context on the four of us, and just to talk a little bit more about our backgrounds, kind of our church backgrounds, and maybe how that's influenced our own theological perspectives today, things that we're reading, things that we're listening to. And then, finally, just kind of try to give you a couple thoughts on what we think of the state of the church during this pandemic. So let's just start off first, and I'll go to Kyle first, but just give us your background on church and how that might inform your own theology.
Yeah, so I am a church druggie, meaning I was drugged to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and every other time the church was open. My dad's a Southern Baptist minister of music. My grandfather is a missionary Baptist pastor, which is pretty fundamentalist. So I've grown up going to the church and being part of the church as a large part of my life. In that Southern Baptist world, I was deeply immersed, very much so. That was pretty much everything I attended and was part of. I do videos, and that's because I had a video made of me in my sophomore year of high school by the Youth Evangelism Conference in Oklahoma, which was a conference. Chris, I'm sure Chris knows this. Every year, there were certain rhythms of the Baptist calendar in Oklahoma. There was Falls Creek, which was this giant youth summer camp. There was Youth Evangelism Conference, which was a conference with big speakers who would come and talk about evangelism. And at that conference is when I had a video made of me and had to go up on stage and all this crazy stuff. And I decided maybe he didn't want to be on stage, but I like being the guy making the videos. And then I went to a Baptist university, Southern Baptist University in Oklahoma. So that was sort of what I was immersed in until. So that's pretty much my background, a Baptist to Baptist.
Chris?
Yeah, I feel like that's I can kind of piggyback off of a lot of Kyle's journey, but definitely it was a consistent rhythm. I would say I was a pretty, legalistic Baptist in the sense of just, showing up, doing all the right things, being in the right places at the right time. So it was really in college for me where I started to see discipleship and like the relational pieces really come together. I was a part of a campus ministry that focused heavily on discipleship and just one-to-one relationship building. And so love that. I feel like that was very formational for me. And then Kyle and I actually...
Really crazy after we found that out, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't until San Antonio where we made those connections and realized that we had crossed paths in the past. But yeah, I would also show my past kind of vocation wasn't really inside the church. It was more outside in big companies doing financial analysis, things like that. So it's really just the last 10 to 12 years where I've jumped into working in the church, and I really loved it. But yeah, I never would have picked San Antonio off of a map as far as a place to live. Definitely God's providence and plan for me to be here. It was a corporate move that brought me to San Antonio, and it was having friendships like the guys here that kept me here, and now church planting here. So it's a little bit of my Baptist to non-denom to now whatever we are at the park, and planting neighborhood churches. So
Great, Mike.
Yeah, I'm going to spice things up by saying that I also grew up in the Southern Baptist Church on the west side of San Antonio, and really loved it. It was a very diverse community, and our pastor was, as well as New Testament, obviously. But yeah, we were there, kind of like Kyle was saying, every time the doors were open, and just super involved. And yeah, from there went to non-denominational, and now the park. And so, yeah, I think for me, I've kind of gone through seasons of critiquing my Baptist upbringing. And I think where I'm at today is just a real appreciation for just a lot of the rhythms and a lot of the liturgy of it, and just a real familial feel in the church that I grew up in that in many ways the park reminds me of. And so
Right, and I think it's important, and the reason we're talking about this is because when you see things happening in the world, you have a tendency to run it through whatever filters you were raised with. And so I think sometimes we talk about theology and things of this nature, justice. It's important to know those backgrounds. So I am not a Southern Baptist. I actually don't think I've ever been to a Southern Baptist church service. So I honestly don't think I have. And so I've only been inside of one or two. And so I remember bowling in one in Houston. It was a really big one. And I think I played racquetball there. So that's as close as I've ever come to being a Southern Baptist. But so for me, it's been a big mess. I grew up, I was christened as a baby in the Episcopal Church. And then I got involved with my dad in a non-denominational church in the neighborhood I grew up in, North Houston, a really small non-denominational Bible church, which is where my dad rededicated his life to Christ. And it was probably the first time I ever kind of engaged in worship, but not really knowing Christ yet or having faith, but just kind of engaging in worship. And I've always been a musician, and so I was able to start playing my guitar there and kind of get involved. And then ended up moving to a Methodist church in the same neighborhood. And so I grew up working in the Methodist church as a youth pastor. And I did that for about 20 years. I started in the Methodist church, and then I moved to a non-denominational church, and then the park. And so the church that we planted 10 years ago. And so it's been all over the map. I was deeply involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, but I also remember being a part of the emerging church movement back when it didn't seem strange at all. And it might not still seem strange to some of you then, but I remember lighting a lot of candles in the early 2000s and having really intense, deep worship. I was also part of the Passion movement in college. And so really a lot of different trends. And one of the things I've learned is that every one of those things has formed me in my ecclesiology. So I think the Episcopal Church taught me to love liturgy and history and structure. I think the Methodist Church, I think that the Methodists serve better than almost any churches, and to just invest fully in the Bible and to know the scriptures. And so, and now I think kind of the park and me, I'm kind of all those streams now have come together in some ways. So, all right, good. So let's talk a little bit about, kind of what's piquing our interest right now. And I'll just shift over to Kyle.
Man, that's super broad. Like, what's piquing my interest? That's like wide open. Anyway, so what I've been doing recently, so we just finished a class in seminary. All four of us have been along the same path. So we have finished almost all of our classes except for one, which was supposed to happen at the end of this pandemic. So this was going to be a week where we went and we learned for a full week, and it's called an intensive. It was going to be taught by a guy named Greg Boyd. And so after I finished my seminary class back in June, I decided to take a break and read some fiction first. I read some Wendell Berry of his Port William stuff, but then I picked up and started reading some more of this theology stuff. So I've been reading Greg Boyd's God at War, and my goodness, it is fascinating. A lot of it's about just understanding the spiritual world of like angels and demons and Satan and what it is in the scripture, and a really, really deep dive into that. So I've been reading a lot about that. So Greg Boyd has a view that's called open theism. I don't have even close enough time to go into that. A lot of that's based off of just determinism, the problem of evil and everything. So I've really been thinking about the problem of evil and all these things with that. So that's what's piqued my interest.
Yeah, that's good. For me, I think kind of we can read some of his works. We're also, we're doing some of his Narnia, stuff with our boys. So it's felt like a very C.S. Lewis right now, a little more than I have in the past. Just blanked on his name. Boyd. Yeah, Greg Boyd. Yeah. I'm kind of leaning into Hugh Halter right now. He's leading some seminars on just reimagining the church a little bit right now. Not from a foundational sense, but really about sort of our posture in the culture. And he's got a great book. He's got several, great resources out there. But I'm reading his book right now called Flesh, and it's just about the church as an incarnational presence and what that really means and looks like. So as far as books, that's kind of what I'm leaning into. I'm also excited for tomorrow, because I think tomorrow is when Tom Hanks's movie on Apple TV I'm most excited about. But you can maybe guess. But C.S. Lewis, a little bit of Hugh Halter, and then new Tom Hanks.
Hamilton, which just came out on Disney Plus, which was share a little bit about creativity. And so just watching the musical, want to see it. I just think it's been a really good reminder of just God's work in people's lives, and it's a really cool story of Alexander Hamilton, as well as was not all white and all the different tensions going on around women's rights and rights for people of color and slavery. And so I think it's just a really timely book for where we're at in our culture and addressing racism. And watching the musical, I was like, how did he write a whole book about God's presence and work in this story? Because it's kind of hard to see at times, but just reading it, it's been really cool, just talking about grace and the saint and the sinner. And that's really spoken to me a lot of how we are all at all times both saint and sinner, until obviously Jesus comes to make all things new. So that's just been really cool to see, an entertaining play, but also just read some spiritual truths from it.
Awesome, thanks. Well, like Kyle, I'm pretty deep into Greg Boyd right now because I'm taking a class with him in September. So it's required reading, which has framed up a lot of my life for the last 4 years, has been required reading. And so I haven't had a lot of choices on what I get to read. But I am finding God at War to be really fascinating. And I've been kind of diving in on a lot of Boyd's sermons and preaching. There's a couple other books that I'm reading right now, kind of all over the map. So one is by Stuart Murray. It's called The Naked Anabaptist, and it's a great just kind of overview of the Anabaptist movement, trying to understand that and do a little more of a deep dive there. And then the other one I'm reading is The History of the Catholic Church, which is like a 2,000-page book. But I'm finding it written in sort of the formation of the institutions, and I find it to be really fascinating, and wanting to do a deeper dive into Catholicism in general and just to understand that more. So those are things I'm reading. So as far as questions go today, I think that the last kind of thing we wanted to do is really just to get everybody's take on kind of the state of the church right now. How do you see what's going on right now? From your perspective, where are we at? What's hopeful? What's fearful?
A really tough season. Forum is because we don't have the opportunity to see people and to engage, and so I think there's a lot of challenges that come with that, especially for us, particularly at the park, which is just very familial, very relational, and then afterwards hanging out, going to grab lunch throughout the week, meeting up, all those sorts of things. It really feels like kind of the foundation of who we are as a church has been stripped from us, and so it's been really difficult interacting virtually or through phone calls or email, things like that, where just that personal touch and that tone and all these things are just are being lost right now. And so, yeah, I think personally, just as a pastor and a shepherd, it feels like I'm extremely handicapped in my ability to do that. And so I think that's just our particular reality, and just praying through and discerning what our role looks like, and how we are supposed to be loving people, how we're supposed to be listening, how we're supposed to engage with people in just a very limited setting. And so I think with that in mind, something that Lindsay Wright has said that I think has been pretty spot on with just everything that's going on right now in the world, whether it's racism or mental health issues and just all these things that are popping up. And we live in a divisive time, which is not a surprise. I think it was just really cool how God put Love Over Fear by Dan White Jr. on our heart, political system and different beliefs that believers have around certain things, and just that, it's just a really divisive that we have maybe full calendars. I don't like. Things are being exposed and actively as a people. And as these things are being brought to light, I think it just makes it so much more difficult to process in community, because we just don't have that as easily available. And so, yeah, I think the church is, not to be pessimistic at all, but I think the church overall is just struggling to figure out how to best move forward in this time. And I also think there's great hope, because some of the things that maybe were masked or, we could just sweep under the rug or gloss over are really being brought to the forefront, to where we're addressing things and kind of reevaluating how we're doing things, where we're doing them, and all these sorts of things. So, I think it's a challenge, but I do think that there's a lot of hope for, I don't know if rebirthing is the right word, but just reimagining what church should look like for the park and in general, of what is the purpose, and as things are being stripped away, what do we add on, and what's the purpose behind those things. So challenging but hopeful is kind of my assessment.
Yeah, I know Chris is supposed to go next, but I'm going to jump in, because what I was going to say has a lot to do with that. I'm sure a lot of ours will kind of fit together, but I've really been thinking about this moment as an apocalypse, and that sounds like all terrible when people talk about end of the world is what they imagine apocalypse meaning. But I remember when we did a study on Revelation a couple of years ago, reading some books and really diving into Revelation, that Revelation means apocalypse, which also means unveiling, which means it's a revealing of the things that have been hidden. And that this moment we're in is that. It is a time when the things that sort of been swept under the rug, or things we've been able to just kind of ignore that's going on in the world, is getting sick because of the ones who are deemed as essential workers. And all along, we've been putting a lot of extra stuff on their backs when they don't have good health care, or they're not getting good wages, or employers aren't taking care of them. All those things have been true all along. It's been exposed even more as something that's being unveiled about the way we had done church, that around a fun party, and that we have to be changes maybe the way we view because really what they need discipleship. I think it's kind of the end of the world as it was before. That doesn't mean the end of the entire world, the entire apocalypse, but it is a small apocalypse and different. Going forward, schools are going to be a thing different, businesses are going to be different, and the church is going to be different, because it was the end of the world. The church as it was ended. It was the end of that era. Whatever it becomes now, I don't know, but I think it has ended. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about as we've been moving through this time.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
good.
can I jump in?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I think this is what we should do rather than one at a time, right? We should.
Was thinking about that of like, the death of how life was is painful, and the same is probably true for the church and just us as individuals, that death and pain is not always just I think that helped me have hope, is that, okay, this is painful and it's a death, and what are we praying for? What is God?
If we have read the biblical narrative, especially in places where God's people are facing captivity or some kind of cataclysmic event, and if we read those from a distance, now I think we have the chance to read those up close, because I think that, like I think Kyle was saying, we've leaned really hard, and it's been great as a gathered people, and then we would verbally articulate that we're also a scattered people. And I think all COVID-19 in the ways that God was calling them to, but I do think that where our attention now is focused is, what does it look like as a scattered people, like specifically in those environments? Because I mean, you go read about the bad environment. I've read that and gone, man, way to go, guys, for just pressing on through that, for being faithful through that, for that remnant that did that. Faithfulness look like? What does abiding look like for us as a scattered people when we can't get in the same room together? So I think that's the challenge in front of us. But I also think, like you guys are saying, it's a hopeful reality that what's going to come out of this is going to be really beautiful. But I'm all over the map, to be honest. Like, emotionally, like I'll have a good day, and then I'll have a day where I'm like, it's over. It's a moment with.
Yeah, I've had weeks where like just overwhelmed, and hearing a worship song come on and just start crying, and not really knowing like what I was even mourning, or what was off. And again, I imagine that's how it's not built for that. Sermons are built to be contextual, not only to a place, but also to a people. I think we have to work out our salvation together, and to understand what the sanctification of the Lord is and how it works in us. And we have to bounce on this, as far as like, there are some churches that are really high tech, like full production studios, and they've been doing this stuff for years. And then there's kind of us who we've adapted, and I mean, mainly Kyle, but then you have these other churches, and this is what really concerns me, is you have these other churches that are really our spiritual mothers and fathers, that, and I look at that as like a lost site, or somebody. I mean, NT Wright already has I think unless you have like a publishing contract or something like that, your voice has really been removed, your influential voice. And so that really concerns me. We can't hear from the bishops. We can't hear from the elders of the church in the world right now. Or like I said, the tech is so low that it's kind of almost impossible to engage. And so hopefully that's something that, I don't know if that'll change or lighten up, or what it'll look like. And I guess my last thing that I'm concerned about is the it's the folks that come to church once a month, and which I love you. I'm glad that they do that. I'm not. This isn't meant to be critical. It's maybe who, like, we've been in this for so long that when the church is open, we're just gonna go. I mean, it'll